Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to Sansad TV. I am Tina Jha, you're watching Perspective. India's G20 moment is here. World leaders have begun to arrive for the 18th G20 Summit in New Delhi on the 9th and 10th of September. Now, these 2 days provide leaders from the group of 20 economies the opportunity to discuss solutions to the most pressing problems facing the world today. Amid the deep geopolitical divide, India provided an all-embracing outlook with its G20 theme, Vasudhaiva Kutumbukam, which means the world is one family. So as G20 Chair, India set the agenda for countries to progress as one universal family, transcending borders, languages and ideologies. In the words of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, as one earth, the world must come together to nurture our planet. As one family, we must support each other in the pursuit of growth, and we must move together towards a shared future, one future, which is an undeniable truth in these interconnected times. So as we head towards the G20 Leaders Summit, we analyze how successful has India been in shifting the worldview from GDP-centric to human-centric. Also, will India succeed in making the global table larger, ensuring representation and contribution of every country? We'll talk about this and much more in Perspective today with two distinguished guests joining us on the telecast. I'm pleased to welcome former Ambassador Dr. Mohan Kumar and Professor Shrikant Kondapalli, Distinguished Fellow, VIF. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me on this edition of Perspective. Ambassador, to you first. So before the curtain rises on the G20 Leaders Summit, let me begin by asking you, getting your perspective on what makes India's G20 presidency unique and significant.
Thank you very much for having me. I think you said that the G20 presidency of India is taking place at a time of geopolitical complexity. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think it is a very fraught situation from a geopolitical point of view, and that makes it extremely important. The world was on the verge of getting fragmented into two blocks, a China-led bloc, if you like, a US-led bloc. So India has its task well cut out. And I think the slogan Vasudhaiva Kutumbukam is much more than a rhetoric. I really think India has a huge challenge in terms of bringing the world together. So fundamentally, I would say, if India can do two things. One, if India can bring the world together and try and make a good declaration on the basis of consensus, at least the major parts of the declaration on the basis of consensus, that would have been a successful summit. But perhaps the most important is, can India be the voice of the global South? That really is the litmus test as far as I am concerned, because that is the goal that India set for itself. And we will have to wait and see in the final declaration whether we can live up to the expectations, not just from India, but from this G20 summit.
Absolutely. You're right, Ambassador. We'll come to that in just a bit, whether the G20 will take a cue from BRICS and agree to the expansion, bringing in the African Union into its fold. That's something that we'll come to in just a bit, Professor. But first, your perspective on the larger umbrella that India has provided to the world at this deeply divided time, that we must progress as one universal family, looking at pertinent global problems rather than focusing on geopolitical crisis as much. Do you think India has managed to expand the scope of agreements and narrow down the area of disagreements by and large?
I think so. We have had nearly 220 meetings, and 59 major issues have been raised. And it is said that 90% consensus has been reached over a week ago. And the Sherpas meeting yesterday, day before, could have ironed out some other differences. Since Bali summit, the Ukrainian conflict has come to the fore in this economic forum. And I think what India tried to do was to bring in the socio-economic concerns of the majority of the countries. The January meeting this year that brought in nearly over 100 countries, and the concerns expressed on the socio-economic problems that a majority of the countries are facing. these are now brought to the table, and that included the Sustainable Development Goals, climate change issues, and the energy prices, the issues related to food prices, fertilizers, and other digitalization, so on and so forth. So I think these are affecting a majority of the countries in the world today. And India tried to galvanize the opinion of the majority of the countries in the world. So I think that is a big contribution that India made, number one. Number two, unlike the foreign policy events which were centered on Delhi, this has now gone to nearly 60 odd cities across the country. And there is a certain socialization of the foreign policy related matters. And today this has been dispersed to various other parts of the country. And so I think this is a second major contribution of this G20 as such. And I think this is very significant.
So, on a lot of substantial issues, as you point out, Professor, India has achieved success by gaining consensus from a lot of these member countries. But as Ambassador was rightly saying, India's effort has largely been on making the G20 more inclusive, more representative, for which we have also called for inclusion of the African Union. How hopeful are you of the G20 countries agreeing to include the AU into its fold?
The Prime Minister had gone to various countries in the past few months and elicited the opinion and support of many countries within the G20 in order to get the African Union membership into the G20. Let us recall Prime Minister Modi's visit to Washington, D.C., where he requested the consent from United States, which is the largest economy in the world, for the concerns of the African Union membership in G20, number one. We have also seen other capitals that the Prime Minister had gone to, especially in Europe and also Brazil and other places where he requested for the support for the African Union's membership.
Right.
It seems there are about 4 or 5 countries which are opposed to the African Union membership. One is in terms of the ASEAN membership, there is some concern expressed by Indonesia. There is one by South Korea on the expansion issue. And so that possibly would have been sorted out by this time. And I'm optimistic that the African Union will be made a member of the G20 in the next few days.
Okay. Ambassador, your thoughts on the challenges that India may face in getting this possible outcome, that of the expansion of the G20 to make it more representative, to ensure that the global table becomes as large as possible, every country's voice is heard.
I think I agree with Professor Kondapalli that African Union is a shoe-in. Africa is politically so important that I cannot see anyone objecting to the inclusion of African Union. So I think it's a done deal, frankly. And that would be a success in terms of India pushing for it, because we wanted to be the voice of the global South. And you can't really be voice of the global South if Africa is left out of it. But whether we will have expansion of individual countries in the future, I have my doubts, because even with the existing G20, we are unable to find consensus on a small number of issues. So you don't want to make the institution or the organization so unwieldy. But I think it's a good idea to have the African Union in. And I agree with the professor's remarks on ASEAN and other institutions. But I think the small number of issues on which a consensus is still elusive, if you allow me, one is obviously Ukraine. And that is no fault of anybody, because the countries concerned have changed their views on the language. After all, they agreed to a particular language in Bali. They are unable to agree to it now because their positions have hardened. So that is one issue. For me, the important litmus test, as I said, is issues which are of importance to global South. And that would be, you've got sustainable development goals, you've got climate change, you've got debt relief, digital public infrastructure, and food security / agriculture. On some of these issues, a lot of good work has been done, and I am hopeful that we will have a good, solid outcome by the time the summit finishes on the 10th of September. So I'm extremely optimistic about producing a good outcome document, which can then reflect the interests and the concerns of the global South.
But Ambassador, is there a concern that if this diplomatic impasse over the kind of language that is acceptable to all continues, will it impact a declaration of a joint communique? Do you see that not happening if there's no consensus?
Yes, one has to be honest. If you do not have a total consensus on that paragraph on Ukraine,
right,
then you will have a title which says outcome document and chair's summary. I have seen all the ministerial meetings and the outcome documents so far. The pattern has been that you make it an outcome document for the bulk of the declaration, which could be 90%, as the professor said, and the small number of issues on which countries are not able to agree. India, as the president of G20, will issue a chair's summary, and it will remain a chair's summary. The difference, you may ask, what is the difference? I think the difference is the outcome document on the basis of consensus is at least politically binding to all the countries. I'm not saying it is legally enforceable, but there is political commitment. There is a moral suasion argument, if you like. But if it is a chair's summary, it does not bind any of the G20 members. So that is really the only thing I see standing between India and a hugely successful G20 summit. But, you know, seasoned observers will know why it is a chair's summary, because Russia and China are not able to agree with a paragraph on Ukraine. So at the end of the day, I don't think it will make too much of a difference. Yes, it takes a little bit of a sheen away from the outcome document, but not too much. And in the past, we have had paragraphs on which countries have had concerns. In the Osaka summit, there was an entire paragraph which said the United States does not want to be committed to the Paris Climate Change Accord. Yeah. This was when President Donald Trump was there in power in the White House. And then again in Bali, interestingly, when it came to debt, there was one country which dissociated itself from that paragraph. So there are precedents, but yes, not in the main final document. You don't have two countries so far saying we don't agree. So that will be a bit of a dampener, if you like, but I don't think it will take away from the substantive outcome of the summit on issues like sustainable development goals, climate change, digital public infrastructure, debt relief, and food security.
Okay. Professor, do you think the absence of the presidents of Russia and China could add to this challenge in getting the consensus? Perhaps, as the ambassador said, it could be a dampener if there's no final outcome document after all the kind of effort that India has made. What's interesting about India's G20 presidency is that it's anything but a fairly routine annual presidency. There are hopes, aspirations, riding of not just Indians, but of all the countries in the global South who are now expecting greater consensus on issues that directly impact them. And now with two presidents being conspicuous by their absence, will that also impact the final outcome?
Well, it's true that President Putin and President Xi are not attending this meeting. However, they are represented by the number 2 in the Politburo, Premier Li Qiang, and by Foreign Minister Lavrov. We have seen Foreign Minister Lavrov's performance in Raising a Dialogue here in Delhi before. And he had also given the bottom lines of the joint statement, the outcome of this meeting. So I think the presence of Russian Foreign Minister and Premier Li Qiang would suffice for the kind of outcomes that we are looking at. As Ambassador Mohan Kumar mentioned, there is a tussle. 2:18 is the thing that we have seen in Bali before, and it is likely to continue. So the presence or absence of these leaders does not really impact on the outcome. It is true that the Ukrainian conflict has become the centerpiece since last year, and this has also affected the joint statements or lack of them for the finance ministers, the foreign ministers, or other delegations outcome in the past few months. And it is quite possible that the same thing could happen in the next 2-3 days on this issue. But what is important is that the G20 is primarily for economic issues, right, since the global financial crisis affected the international economy, trade, investments, and other aspects. So from that point of view, I think a substantial portion of the discussion is related to the economic resurrection of the growth rates of and also the social sector that has been now prominently come into the focus in
right,
this summit meeting.
Right, Professor.
So
yeah, let's hope that by the time the G20 Leaders Summit begins, some kind of concrete breakthrough is achieved by India, as we did in Bali. We did play a major role in getting Russia to agree. Let's hope something similar happens and we get to see a final outcome document. But as you rightly said, G20 Ambassador is all about economic cooperation with the kind of economic flux that the world is in today, particularly the developing part of the world, whose representation India has been wanting and for which we've been trying to make several efforts. The fact that the 4-year presidency of G20 began with Indonesia, came to India, next it goes to Brazil, then followed by South Africa. What's interesting is 4 developing economies in the global South hold the presidency of the G20 for 4 years. How crucial is that in giving the G20 global South countries the rare opportunity to drive the agenda, to discuss issues that directly impact them?
Oh, I think it's hugely important. And I think it is fortuitous. It's good to remember that this is an accident, because I want to remind your viewers that India's turn to host the G20 summit was actually a couple of years earlier. We forfeited our chance to host the summit because we rightly wanted the summit to coincide with the 75th anniversary of our independence. So we requested Italy to take on the presidency of the G20, which I did. So it is a coincidence in that sense. But having said that, you are absolutely spot on. I think the fact that you have 4 developing countries and very leading developing countries, frankly. I mean, they're not insignificant developing countries. These are very important leaders of the developing world. As you said, Indonesia, India, Brazil, and then South Africa, and from all different continents, ASEAN, South Asia, and then we go on to Latin America and then Africa. I think that's hugely important. I think what it does is it provides a certain degree of continuity in the emphasis that the presidency can lay on issues. I am not saying that the presidency always gets what it wants, because frankly, the presidency has to strive hard to get a consensus among G20 countries. That is the job of the presidency. But having said that, the presidency also has the prerogative of focusing on certain issues. And the hugely important thing, which you are pointing out, that there are 4 developing countries, is that there could be continuous emphasis on issues like sustainable development goals, food security, on issues like debt relief, because these issues are not going away.
Absolutely.
These issues will continue to be major issues for the South. And the fact that you've got Brazil and South Africa taking over, and the fact that you've got a troika mechanism in the G20, which is India will still be part of the troika in terms of advising Brazil. So the troika on 1st of December will be India, Brazil, and South Africa. That is the past president, the current president, and the future president. That, I think, makes a difference in terms of the emphasis on issues, in terms of the effort that countries want to put to get an outcome on these crucial issues.
Absolutely. Professor, I'll take one last question from you, and what's been very interesting about the manner in which India has tried to take G20 to the people. Over 200 meetings held in as many as 60 cities means that we are not just making our domestic population aware of the significance of G20, we're also showcasing to the world how rich and diverse India's culture is. What kind of impact do you see it having on society, on taking G20 to the people, and all the issues that are discussed at G20, bringing it into the mainstream, making it into a people's movement, something which works for a huge population like ours?
Absolutely. I think there is taking it to the people, to different cities, that has led to a transition from an elite approach to a kind of popular approach on a foreign policy issue. Number two, this would trigger a lot of tourism. These delegates have gone to different parts of the country. They have seen the diversity that India offers, from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, and from Northeast to the Western coast. I think there is a huge tourism dividend that we could expect. Thirdly, B2B, business to business deals with the local chambers of commerce, trying to engage in these discussions that have happened so far. I think that is a major contribution with the local businesses. I think that is a major contribution as well. In addition, of course, as you mentioned, there is the culture that is displayed in different. So soft power is one which really is projected during this G20 meeting by spreading across to different cities across India. I think that is a major, spread of the soft power of India. I think is a major contribution for this.
You're right. So let's hope, that this kind of effort does not go in vain. We've worked extremely hard over the last 9 to 10 months in shifting the GDP-centric view of the world to human-centric globalization, as Prime Minister Modi has reiterated, making G20, taking G20, in fact, closer to people and helping them understand its significance, the role that India is now playing as the voice of the global South. Also, the fact that so far, despite the global challenges, India has steered through challenges extremely well. In the next 2 days, let's be hopeful that the impasse that continues over the kind of language about retention or exclusion of the Bali paras will also be achieved. Some kind of breakthrough will be achieved at the diplomatic level, and we do get to see a final document which will mean a true success for India's G20 presidency. So that having been said, I'll have to wind up the program. Time allows me to take up only that much on this edition of Perspective. Thank you, Professor and Ambassador, for joining us on the program today, sharing your thoughts with us and our viewers. And to you viewers, thank you very much for your time as well. I'll see you same time tomorrow now. Take good care of yourselves. Keep watching Sansad TV.